The old radio in Jake's pickup truck crackled with static as the weatherman's voice cut through the evening air. "Folks, this storm system is moving faster than we expected. We're looking at severe thunderstorms, possible tornadoes, and flash flooding across the entire county. If you're out there, get inside now." Jake turned up the volume and pressed harder on the gas pedal. He'd been ranching in Texas for over 20 years, and he could feel it in his bones when Mother Nature was about to throw a tantrum. The air felt heavy and electric, like the whole world was holding its breath. Dark clouds rolled across the sky like a giant gray blanket, swallowing up the last bits of daylight. His grandfather used to say you could tell a bad storm by how quiet the animals got. Sure enough, the cattle were all huddled together in the far corner of the pasture, heads down, waiting for whatever was coming. Even the birds had stopped singing. The only sound was the wind picking up speed, making the tall grass dance in waves. Jake had about 30 more minutes of work left before he could head home. He needed to check the fence line along the highway and make sure the gate latches were secure. A few years back, a storm had blown his gates wide open, and it took 3 days to round up all the cattle that had wandered onto the road. He wasn't about to let that happen again. The first fat raindrops hit his windshield as he drove along the fence. They splattered like bugs, leaving streaky marks across the glass. Within minutes, the drops got bigger and came down faster. Jake flicked on his headlights, even though it wasn't quite dark yet. The storm was making everything dim and gray. That's when he saw her at first. Thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. There, under the big oak tree by the highway, was what looked like a person. Jake slowed down and squinted through the rain. It was definitely someone sitting on the ground, leaning against the tree trunk. In this weather, that was dangerous. More than dangerous, it could be deadly. Jake pulled over and left his truck running. The rain was coming down hard now, soaking through his jacket in seconds. As he got closer, he could see it was a young woman. She was holding something wrapped in what looked like a blanket or towel. Her long dark hair was plastered to her head, and she was shivering so hard her whole body was shaking. "Hey there," Jake called out, trying not to startle her. "You okay?" The woman looked up at him with wide, scared eyes. She couldn't have been more than 25 years old. She said something in Spanish, speaking so fast and quiet that Jake couldn't make out the words. Then she switched to English, but her accent was thick, and her voice was barely a whisper. "Please, no trouble. Have no money, I just... I just need..." She could see she was pregnant, very pregnant. The bundle she was holding wasn't a baby, it was just her few belongings wrapped up to keep them dry. Her clothes were soaked through, and she looked like she hadn't eaten a good meal in days. "Ma'am, you can't stay out here," Jake said, crouching down so he wasn't towering over her. "The storm's going to get a lot worse. You need to get somewhere safe." Lightning flashed across the sky, followed by a crack of thunder that made them both jump. The woman tried to stand up but stumbled. Jake reached out to steady her, and he could feel how cold and wet she was through her thin jacket. "Bus station," she said, pointing down the highway. "But rain come, and I cannot see road." Jake looked in the direction she was pointing. The nearest bus station was in town, at least 15 miles away. In this storm, she'd never make it.
Hell.
She probably wouldn't make it another hour sitting under this tree. "There's no bus station that way for miles," he told her gently. "And even if there was, the buses aren't running in weather like this." Another flash of lightning lit up the sky, and this time the thunder came almost immediately. The storm was right on top of them. Jake could see the fear in the woman's eyes, getting stronger. She understood enough English to know what he'd just told her. "Look, I've got a ranch just a few miles from here," Jake said. "You can wait out the storm there, get dried off, maybe get something hot to eat. When the weather clears up, I'll drive you wherever you need to go." The woman shook her head quickly. No, I cannot pay. I've nothing to give." "I'm not asking for payment," Jake said. "I'm just offering help. No strings attached." His face in the dim light, trying to decide if she could trust this stranger. Jake could understand her hesitation. She was alone, pregnant, and vulnerable. For all she knew, he could be dangerous. But the storm was getting worse by the minute, and she didn't have many options. The wind picked up even more, bending the oak tree's branches down toward them. Leaves and small twigs were flying through the air. In the distance, Jake could see a wall of rain moving toward them like a gray curtain. "We need to go now," he said, raising his voice over the wind. "That heavy rain's about to hit, and when it does, you won't be able to see your hand in front of your face." As if on cue, the sky opened up. The gentle rain turned into a downpour that felt like someone was dumping buckets of water on their heads. Within seconds, Jake was soaked too. The skin. The woman gasped and pulled her bundle closer to her chest, but there was no way to stay dry anymore. Okay, she said, nodding quickly. "I come with you." Jake helped her to her feet and guided her toward his truck. She moved slowly, one hand on her belly, struggling against the wind and rain. By the time they reached the pickup, they were both drenched and breathing hard. Jake opened the passenger door and helped her climb in. She settled into the seat with a sigh of relief, still clutching her small bundle of belongings. Jake ran around to the driver's side and jumped in, grateful to be out of the storm. "Heat," he said, cranking up the truck's heater as high as it would go. "Let's get you warmed up." The woman nodded gratefully and held her hands up to the vents. Steam began rising from their wet clothes. Jake pulled off his jacket and handed it to her. "I'll put this around your shoulders," he said. "It's not much, but it's dry on the inside." "Thank you," she whispered, wrapping the jacket around herself. "Thank you so much." Jake put the truck in gear and started driving carefully down the slick road. The rain was coming down so hard now that his wipers could barely keep up. He had to drive slowly, leaning forward to peer through the windshield. "What's your name?" Trying to make conversation and help her relax. "Maria," she said quietly. "Maria Santos. I'm Jake. Jake Martinez. You don't have to tell me your whole story right now, but are you hurt? You need a doctor?" Maria shook her head. "No, doctor, I am. What'd you say? I'm okay for now." "Just cold and tired." Jake nodded and focused on driving. The road was already starting to flood in the low spots, and he had to navigate around fallen branches. This was turning out to be one hell of a storm, and it was just getting started. As they drove toward his ranch, Jake wondered what he was getting himself into. He lived alone, had been for 3 years now since his wife passed away. He wasn't used to having house guests, especially not pregnant women who were clearly running from something or someone. But he couldn't have left her there. No decent person could have driven past a pregnant woman sitting alone in a storm like this. Whatever her story was, whatever trouble she might be in, she needed help. And Jake Martinez had never been the kind of man who turned his back on someone in need. The storm raged around them as they made their way through the darkness. Two strangers brought together by circumstances neither of them could have predicted. Behind them, the oak tree stood alone again, bending and swaying in the wind, as if it had been waiting all along to shelter someone who needed refuge before sending them on to safety. The windshield wipers fought against the heavy rain as Jake carefully drove down the muddy road toward his ranch. Every few seconds, lightning would flash across the sky, lighting up the countryside like a giant camera bulb. Maria sat quietly, in the passenger seat, still wrapped in his jacket, watching the storm through the side window. "You warm enough?" Jake asked, glancing over at her. He could see she was still shivering, even with the heater blasting. "Yes, thank you," Maria replied softly. Her voice was barely audible over the sound of rain hammering on the truck's roof. "You are very kind to help me." Jake nodded but didn't say anything. The truth was, he wasn't sure what he was doing. He'd lived alone on the ranch for 3 years now, ever since his wife died in that car accident. He'd gotten used to the quiet, the solitude, the simple routine of taking care of cattle and fixing fences. Now here he was, bringing home a pregnant stranger in the middle of the worst storm he'd seen in years. "Can I ask where you were headed?" Jake said, trying to keep the conversation going. Before the storm hit. Maria was quiet for a long moment. Jake could see her hands fidgeting with the edge of his jacket. When she finally spoke, her voice was even quieter than before. "I was going to Las Cruces," she said, "in New Mexico. My cousin lives there. She said maybe she could help me find work." "That's a long way from here," Jake said. "Were you planning to walk the whole way?" Maria's face flushed red. No, I had bus ticket. But, ... She stopped talking and looked out the window again. Jake waited, but she didn't continue. He could tell there was more to the story, but he didn't want to push. Whatever had happened to her, whatever had left her stranded on the side of the road in a storm, she'd tell him when she was ready. Maybe she wouldn't tell him at all. Either way, that was her choice. They drove in silence. For a few more minutes, the rain was getting heavier, and Jake had to slow down even more. The road was flooding in several spots, and he had to navigate around puddles that looked deep enough to stall the engine. "How far is your ranch?" Maria asked suddenly. "About 5 more minutes," Jake said. "Maybe 10 with this weather. You doing okay? You need me to stop?" "No, I am fine. Just my baby is moving a lot. I think the storm is making her nervous." Jake smiled despite himself. "Her. You know it's a girl." For the first time since he'd found her, Maria smiled too. It was a small smile, but it changed. Her whole face. "Yes, I know. The doctor told me last month. I am going to call her Alina." "That's a pretty name," Jake said. "Alina Martinez, ... No, wait, Alina Santos. That sounds good." Maria's smile faded. "Maybe she will not be Santos. Maybe she will have different name." Jake wondered what that meant, but again, he didn't ask. There were clearly some complicated things going on in Maria's life. He wasn't about to pry into her business. They turned off the main road onto the gravel driveway that led to Jake's ranch. The truck bounced and splashed through potholes. Filled with muddy water, Maria gripped the door handle to steady herself as they bumped along. "Sorry about the rough ride," Jake said. "I keep meaning to get this driveway fixed, but there's always something else that needs doing first." "It is okay," Maria said. "I'm grateful just to be out of the rain." Jake's house came into view through the storm. It wasn't much to look at, a simple one-story ranch house with white siding and a red metal roof. There was a covered porch across the front and a few old rocking chairs that Jake rarely used anymore. Behind the house, Maria could see the outline of a big red barn and several fenced pastures. "Here we are," Jake said, pulling up close to the front porch. "Home sweet home." He turned off the engine and looked over at Maria. She was staring at the house with an expression he couldn't quite read, maybe relief, maybe worry, maybe both. "Listen," Jake said gently, "I want you to know that you're safe here. I'm not going to hurt you or ask you for anything you don't want to give. You can stay as long as you need to wait out the storm, and then I'll take you wherever you want to go. No questions asked." Maria turned to look at him, and Jake could see tears in her eyes. "Why are you being so nice to me? You do not know me. I could be a bad person." Jake shook his head. "You're not a bad person. I can tell. And as for why I'm helping you?" He paused, thinking about how to explain it. "Let's just say I know what it's like to need help and not have anywhere to turn." Before Maria could respond, a particularly loud crack of thunder made them both jump.
Ow.
The storm was getting worse, and they were sitting in a metal truck in the middle of an open yard. "We better get inside," Jake said. "Can you make it to the porch, or do you want me to bring the truck closer?" "I can walk," Maria said, but when she tried to open the door, the wind nearly ripped it from her hands. Jake quickly got out and ran around to help her. The rain was coming down in sheets now, and they were both soaked again by the time they made it to the covered porch. Jake fumbled with his keys, trying to unlock the front door while Maria stood shivering behind him. Finally, the door opened, and they stumbled inside. Jake flipped on the lights and immediately felt embarrassed about the state of his house. He wasn't used to having company, and it showed. There were dishes in the sink, newspapers scattered on the coffee table, and a layer of dust on most of the furniture. "Sorry about the mess," he said, kicking off his muddy boots. "I wasn't expecting visitors." Maria looked around the living room with interest. It was a typical bachelor's house, functional but not fancy. There was a big leather couch facing an old television, a few family photos on the mantel, and not much else. But it was clean enough, and more importantly, it was warm and dry. "It is very nice," she said politely. "Thank you for bringing me here." Jake could see that she was still shivering, and her clothes were dripping wet. "Let me get you some dry clothes and a towel. The bathroom's right down the hall, second door on the left. There's plenty of hot water if you want to take a shower. And warm up." Maria hesitated. "I do not want to be trouble." You're not trouble, Jake said firmly. You're a person who needs help, and I'm a person who can help. That's all there is to it. He disappeared into what Maria assumed was his bedroom and came back a few minutes later with an armload of clothes. These were my wife's, he said quietly. She was about your size, I think. It might be a little big, but they're clean and dry. Maria took the clothes gratefully. Your wife, she will not mind. Jake's face grew sad. She passed away a few years ago. Car accident. Psst. I think she would have wanted someone to use them, especially someone who needed them. I am sorry, Maria said softly. I did not know. It's okay, Jake replied. Go ahead and get cleaned up. I'll make us some coffee and see what I can find for dinner. Maria nodded and headed toward the bathroom. Jake watched her go, then stood. In his living room, listening to the storm rage outside, lightning continued to flash, and the rain pounded against the windows. He'd made the right choice bringing her here. No one should have to weather a storm like this alone, in the bathroom. Maria looked at herself in the mirror. She looked terrible. Wet hair, pale skin, dark circles under her eyes. She touched her belly gently and felt Alina moving around inside. We are safe now, little one, she whispered. This man, Jake, he is a good person. We will be okay, she turned on the shower and let the hot water wash away the cold and fear of the evening. For the first time in weeks, she felt like maybe things were going to work out after all. The next morning, Jake woke up to the sound of silence. After 3 days of nonstop rain and wind, the sudden quiet felt almost strange. Sunlight was streaming through his bedroom window, and he could hear birds chirping outside. The storm had finally passed. He lay in bed for a moment, remembering that he wasn't alone in the house anymore. Maria was sleeping in the spare room down the hall. Well, it used to be the spare room. For the past 2 years, it had been more like a storage closet, where he dumped everything he didn't know what to do with. Jake got up and walked quietly to the kitchen to make coffee. As he passed the spare room, he could hear Maria moving around. Inside, she was probably awake too, maybe wondering what came next. Jake wondered the same thing. Last night, after Maria had showered and changed into his wife's old clothes, they'd sat in the living room drinking coffee and eating scrambled eggs. Maria had been polite but guarded, answering his questions with short responses. She'd told him a little more about her situation, how her boyfriend had left her at a gas station when he found out she was pregnant, how she'd been trying to get to her cousin in New Mexico. But Jake could tell there was more to the story. Maria had the look of someone who'd been running for a while, someone who'd learned not to trust too easily. He didn't blame her for being careful. Good morning, Maria said softly, appearing in the kitchen doorway. She was wearing the clothes. He'd given her a simple blue dress that had belonged to his wife. It was a little loose on her, but it looked good. Maria looked rested, which was more than she'd looked the night before. Morning, Jake replied, pouring her a cup of coffee. How did you sleep? Very good, thank you. The bed is very comfortable. Maria accepted the coffee gratefully and sat down at the small kitchen table. The storm, it is finished. Looks like it, Jake said, glancing out the window. Nice. Sun's shining, birds are singing. Should be a nice day. Maria nodded, but Jake could see something troubled in her expression. She was probably thinking about leaving, about getting back on the road to find her cousin. The thought made Jake feel strangely sad. Are you hungry? He asked. I can make some breakfast. I do not want to be trouble, Maria said, like she'd said several times the night before. You keep saying that, Jake replied, opening the refrigerator. But you're not trouble. You're just a person who needs help. He pulled out eggs and bacon and started cooking. Maria watched him work, sipping her coffee and occasionally touching her belly when the baby moved. Jake found himself stealing glances at her when he thought she wasn't looking. She was pretty, but more than that, there was something about her that reminded him of strength. Even scared and alone, she carried herself with dignity. Jake, Maria said suddenly, I need to tell you something. He turned from the stove to look at her. Her face was serious, worried. What is it? I have no money, she said quietly. No money for bus ticket, no money for food, no money for anything. When my boyfriend left me, he took everything. My purse, my phone, Everything. I only have the clothes I was wearing and a few things in my bag. Jake nodded. He'd figured as much. Okay, so what do you want to tell me? Maria looked confused. I just told you, I have no money. I heard you, Jake said, turning back to the bacon. I'm asking what you want to tell me about it. I cannot pay you for helping me. I cannot pay for the food or the clothes or sleeping here. I have nothing to give you. Jake finished cooking and brought 2 plates to the table. He sat down across from Maria and looked at her seriously. Maria, I need you to listen to me carefully, he said. I didn't help you because I wanted you to pay me back. I helped you because it was the right thing to do. You don't owe me anything. Maria's eyes filled with tears. But I cannot just take and give nothing back. That is not right. Who says you're not giving anything back? Jake asked. You're giving me company. You're giving me someone to cook for besides myself. You're giving me a reason to clean up this messy house. Maria smiled a little through her tears. You are a very kind man, Jake Martinez. They ate breakfast in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the ranch waking up outside.
Ow.
Hear his cattle moving around in the pasture, probably happy to be out in the sunshine after 3 days of storms. After breakfast, Jake went outside to check on his animals and survey the storm damage. Maria asked if she could come with him, and Jake said yes. He was curious to see how a city girl would react to ranch life. The storm had left its mark on the property. There were broken tree branches everywhere, and one of the fence posts had been knocked over, but overall the damage wasn't too bad. The cattle were all accounted for, and the barn had held up well. You have very many cows, Maria observed, watching the herd graze in the distance. About 200 head, Jake said. Used to be more, but I had to sell some off last year. Times have been tough. Maria nodded like she understood tough times. What do you do with them? Raise them for beef mostly? Some for breeding? It's not an easy business, but it's what I know. They walked around the property together, Jake, pointing out different aspects of the ranch. Maria asked thoughtful questions and seemed genuinely interested in learning. She had a natural way with the animals, too. When they got close to the fence, several of the cows came over to see her. They like you, Jake said, surprised. I grew up on a small farm in Mexico, Maria explained. Before we moved to the city, I always loved animals. That afternoon, Maria insisted on helping Jake with ranch work. She said she felt useless just sitting around, and she wanted to earn her keep somehow. But Jake tried to tell her she didn't need to earn anything, but Maria was stubborn. She turned out to be a natural helper. She was good at organizing things, and she had an eye for detail that Jake appreciated. When they were fixing the broken fence, Maria noticed that several other posts were loose and needed attention. When they were cleaning up storm debris, she spotted a section of roof on the barn that had been damaged. You have good eyes, Jake told her. I've been walking past that barn for weeks and never noticed that loose shingle. Sometimes it takes fresh eyes to see things. Maria replied. By the end of the first week, they had fallen into a comfortable routine. Jake would get up early to take care of the animals, and Maria would have coffee ready when he came back in. They'd eat breakfast together, then spend the day working on various ranch projects. In the evenings, they'd sit on the front porch and watch the sunset. Maria was getting stronger and healthier. The constant worry lines around her eyes were starting to fade, and she was gaining weight. Her pregnancy was progressing well, and she seemed more relaxed than she had when Jake first found her. But Jake could tell she was still planning to leave. She talked about her cousin in New Mexico, about finding work and getting on her feet. She never talked about staying at the ranch permanently. The problem was, Jake was starting to hope she would stay, not just because he enjoyed the company. Although he did, Maria brought life back to the house in a way he hadn't experienced since his wife died. She hummed while she worked, she laughed at his jokes, and she made him feel like he had a purpose beyond just keeping the ranch running. More than that, Jake was starting to care about what happened to her and her baby. The thought of Maria trying to make it on her own, with a newborn and no money, kept him awake at night. He wanted to help her, but he wasn't sure how to offer without making her feel like charity. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the cattle graze in the distance, Maria brought up the subject that had been on both their minds. Jake, she said quietly, I have been thinking. Maybe it is time for me to go. Jake's heart sank, but he tried to keep his voice steady. Where would you go? I could try to call my cousin again. Maybe she could send me bus money. And if she can't? Maria was quiet for a long moment. I do not know, but I cannot stay here forever. This is your home, your life. I am just ... passing through. Jake looked at her sitting there in his wife's old dress, her hand resting on her belly where baby Elena was growing. She didn't look like someone who was just passing through. She looked like someone who belonged here. What if you didn't have to be just passing through? He asked softly. Maria turned to look at him, confusion in her eyes. What do you mean? I mean, what if you stayed? What if you made this your home, too? The question hung in the air between them as the sun set behind the distant hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Jake had said it, and now there was no taking it back. He'd opened his home to Maria in the storm, but now he was opening something much more important, his heart. 3 weeks after Jake asked Maria to stay, she woke up in the middle of the night with sharp pains shooting through her belly. At first she thought it was just the baby moving around, but when she tried to sit up, the pain got worse. Much worse. Jake, she called out, trying not to panic. Jake, I think something is wrong. Jake was at her bedroom door in seconds, still half asleep but alert. One look at Maria's pale face and the way she was clutching her stomach told him everything he needed to know. We're going to the hospital, he said, already reaching for his truck keys right now. The drive to the county hospital took 30 minutes that felt like 30 hours. Maria was having contractions, but they were too early. She was only 7 months along. Elena wasn't supposed to come yet. It's going to be okay, Jake kept saying, though he wasn't sure if he was trying to convince Maria or himself. Everything's going to be fine. At the hospital, they rushed Maria into the emergency room. Jake paced the waiting area, running his hands through his hair and trying not to think about all the things that could go wrong. He'd never felt so helpless in his life. Dr. Wilson, tired-looking woman in her 50s, came out to talk to him after what felt like forever. She's stable for now, the doctor said. We've managed to stop the contractions, but she needs to stay here for observation. The stress and poor nutrition from before you found her have taken their toll. She needs complete bed rest and proper medical care. What does that mean exactly? Jake asked. It means she'll need to stay in the hospital for at least a week, maybe longer. After that, she'll need regular checkups and monitoring until the baby comes. We're talking about expensive medical care, Mr. Martinez. Does she have insurance? Heart sank. No, she doesn't. Dr. Wilson's expression grew more serious. Then you're looking at bills that could easily reach $20,000 or $30,000. Maybe more if there are complications. Jake felt like someone had punched him in the stomach. $20,000. He didn't have that kind of money just lying around. The ranch had been struggling for 2 years, ever since the drought killed. Most of his pasture, grass, and cattle prices dropped. He was already behind on some bills. But when he looked through the window into Maria's room and saw her lying there, scared and alone, he knew there was only one choice he could make. Do whatever she needs, he told the doctor. I'll figure out how to pay for it. The next morning, Jake drove straight to the bank in town. He'd been avoiding this conversation for months, but now he had no choice. He needed to talk to Mr. Henderson. About taking out a second mortgage on the ranch? Jake, I have to be honest with you, Mr. Henderson said, looking over the paperwork. You're already stretched pretty thin. Adding another mortgage payment on top of what you already owe, it's risky. I understand the risk, Jake said, but I need this money. Can I ask what it's for? Sometimes there are other options. Jake explained about Maria, about finding her in the storm, about the medical bills that were piling up. Mr. Henderson listened without interrupting, but Jake could see the concern growing on his face. Jake, I've known you for 15 years. The banker said finally, you're a good man, and I respect what you're trying to do. But you're talking about risking your family's ranch for someone you've known for less than a month. She's not just someone, Jake said quietly. She's important to me. Mr. Henderson sighed and pulled out more forms. If you're determined to do this, I can approve the loan. But Jake, if you can't make the payments, you could lose everything. Your grandfather's ranch, your house, everything your family built. Jake signed the papers anyway. Word travels fast in a small town, and by the end of the week, everyone knew what Jake had done. The reactions were mixed, to put it mildly. Have you lost your mind? His neighbor Tom asked when he stopped by the ranch. You're going to lose everything for some girl you picked up on the side of the road. Carlos, who'd been working on the ranch for 10 years, was more direct. I've got to tell you, this is crazy. That woman's going to take your money and disappear the minute her baby's born. Even some of the people at church had opinions. Mrs. Patterson, who ran the church ladies' auxiliary, cornered Jake after Sunday service. I think it's wonderful that you helped that poor girl, she said in a voice that didn't sound wonderful at all. But really, Jake, there are limits to Christian charity. You can't save everyone. Jake listened to all of them, but he didn't change his mind. He couldn't explain to them what he felt when he looked at Maria. It wasn't just attraction, though she was beautiful. It wasn't just pity, though her situation was heartbreaking. It was something deeper than that. Maria reminded him that there was more to life than just getting by. She made him want to be better, to do better. She brought hope back into his life when he thought he'd lost it forever. But the money problems were real. They were getting worse. Cattle prices dropped, even further that month, hitting a 5-year low. A late freeze killed what was left of the winter pasture, meaning Jake had to buy expensive hay to feed his herd. The feed store bill alone was more than he'd planned to spend in 3 months. Then the truck broke down. The transmission went out completely, and the repair shop wanted $3,000 to fix it. Jake had to choose between fixing the truck and making his mortgage payment. He chose the truck. Figuring he couldn't run a ranch without transportation, the bank wasn't happy about the late payment. This is exactly what I was worried about, Mr. Henderson said when Jake came in to explain. You're already behind, and you've only had the second mortgage for 6 weeks. I'll catch up, Jake promised. Cattle prices will come back up, and I've got some calves I can sell early if I have to. But even as he said it, Jake wasn't sure he believed it. The numbers weren't adding up, no matter how many times he went over them. He was spending more money than he was making, and the gap was getting wider every month. The stress was starting to show. Jake lost weight, stopped sleeping well, and snapped at Carlos over small things that never used to bother him. He found himself staring at the stack of unpaid bills on his kitchen table, wondering how he'd gotten into this mess. The worst part was that Maria knew something was wrong. She was out of the hospital now on bed rest at the ranch, but she wasn't blind. She could see the worry lines around Jake's eyes, the way he sat hunched over paperwork late into the night. Jake, she said one evening, I need to ask you something, and I want you to tell me the truth. Jake looked up from the pile of bills he'd been sorting. What is it? Are you in trouble because of me? Because of the hospital bills? Jake wanted to lie, to tell her everything was fine. But Maria was too smart for that, and she deserved the truth. Things are tight, he admitted, but it's not your fault. The ranch has been struggling for a while. How bad is it? Jake was quiet for a long moment. Bad enough that I might have to sell some land, maybe more than some. Maria's face went pale. You could lose the ranch? I won't lose it, Jake said, though he wasn't sure if that was true. I'll figure something out. This is because of me, Maria said, tears starting to fall. You are going to lose your family's ranch because you helped me. Maria, listen to me, Jake said, moving to sit beside her on the couch. I made my choice. I knew the risks, and I chose to help you anyway. I'd make the same choice again. But why? Maria asked. Why would you risk everything for me? Jake looked at her sitting there, 8 months pregnant with baby Alina, tears streaming down her face. He could have given her a dozen different answers, could have talked about doing the right thing, about Christian charity, about helping people in need. Instead, he told her the simple truth. Because I love you, he said. I love you, and I love Alina, and I can't imagine my life without both of you in it. Maria stared at him in shock. In all the weeks they'd been living together, building a life together, neither of them had said those words out loud. You love me? She whispered. I love you, Jake repeated. And if loving you means I have to risk the ranch, then that's what I'll do. Outside, Storm clouds were gathering again on the horizon. This time Jake and Maria would face whatever came together. Alina Maria Martinez came into the world on a cold March morning during the biggest snowstorm the county had seen in 20 years. Maria's contractions had started the night before, but the roads were too dangerous to drive to the hospital. Jake had to deliver his daughter himself, with only a panicked phone call to Dr. Wilson for guidance. "Push, Maria," Jake said, his voice shaking with nervousness and excitement. "I can see her head. She's almost here." Maria gripped Jake's hand so hard she thought she might break his fingers. She was exhausted and scared, but when she heard Elena's first cry fill the small bedroom, everything else disappeared. Jake wrapped the tiny baby in clean towels and placed her gently in Maria's arms. "She's perfect," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "Absolutely perfect." Alina was small but healthy, with dark hair like her mother and strong lungs that let everyone know she was ready to take on the world. Jake had never felt anything like the love that washed over him when he first held her. This tiny person had already changed his life in ways he couldn't have imagined. "Hello, little one," Maria whispered to her daughter. "Welcome to your new home." The snowstorm kept them isolated for 3 days. Jake called Dr. Wilson to report that mother and baby were doing well, but the roads wouldn't be cleared for several more days. Not that any of them minded. Those first 3 days were like living in a snow globe, cut off from the outside world and all its problems. Jake found himself staying up late just to watch Alina sleep. He'd never been around babies before, and everything she did amazed him. The way she wrapped her tiny fingers around his thumb, the little sounds she made when she was dreaming, the way she seemed to know exactly when Maria needed her to wake up or go to sleep. "You're a natural father," Maria told him one evening as they sat together on the couch, taking turns holding Alina. "I never thought I'd get to be a father," Jake admitted. "After my wife died, I figured that chance was gone forever." "Maybe some chances come back," Maria said softly. "Maybe some things are meant to be." When the roads finally cleared and they could get out, Jake faced the reality he'd been trying to ignore. The ranch was in serious trouble. The bills had kept coming even while Alina was being born. And Jake was now 3 months behind on both mortgage payments. Mr. Henderson called. An emergency meeting at the bank. "Jake, I've tried to work with you, but I can't hold off the board any longer," the banker said, looking genuinely sorry. "You're going to have to sell part of the ranch to catch up on the payments, or we'll have to start foreclosure proceedings." Jake's heart sank. "How much would I have to sell?" "At least 200 acres. Maybe more, depending on what you can get for the land." 200 acres. That was a quarter of his ranch, including some of the best pasture land his grandfather had ever owned. But what choice did he have? "I'll do it," Jake said quietly. "I know this is hard," Mr. Henderson said. "But if you can sell that land and get caught up on payments, you should be able to keep the rest of the ranch running." Jake nodded, but inside he felt like he was dying. Selling that land felt like selling pieces of his family's history. Grandfather had worked his whole life to build this ranch, and now Jake was about to give away a quarter of it when he got home and told Maria what had happened. She cried for an hour. "This is all my fault," she kept saying. "You are losing your family's land because of me and Alina." "Stop," Jake said firmly. "This is not your fault. I made my choices, and I'd make them again. We'll figure this out." But figuring it out was harder than Jake had expected. The land market was slow, and the offers he got were lower than he'd hoped. It took 4 months to find a buyer and buy. Then he owed even more money in interest and late fees. During those difficult months, something unexpected happened. Maria threw herself into helping with the ranch in every way she could, even with a newborn baby to care for. She had Alina strapped to her chest in a baby carrier while she organized Jake's messy bookkeeping system. "Jake, you are losing money in places you do not even know about," she told him one evening, surrounded by spreadsheets and receipts. "Look at this feed bill. They've been overcharging you for 6 months." Maria was right. When Jake called the feed store, they admitted to a computer error and refunded him nearly $800. It wasn't enough to save the ranch, but it was a start. Maria also noticed things about the cattle that Jake had missed. She pointed out which cows were the best mothers, which bulls produced the healthiest calves, and which animals were eating. More than they were worth. Should sell these 5 cows, she told him, pointing to a group grazing near the barn. They are old and not having babies anymore, but they eat as much as the young ones. Jake followed her advice and made an extra $3,000 from selling cattle he hadn't even realized were costing him money. Slowly, Maria's sharp eye for detail and natural understanding of the ranch business began to make a difference. She reorganized the feeding schedule to save money on hay. She negotiated better prices with suppliers. She even suggested selling beef directly to restaurants in town instead of going through the big cattle auction. The restaurant owners, they want to know where their beef comes from, she explained. They will pay more for local cattle that they know are raised well. Maria was right again. Jake started selling directly to 3 restaurants in town, making about 30% more per pound than he'd been getting at auction by the end of Elena's first year. The ranch was not just surviving, it was starting to thrive. Jake had been forced to sell those 200 acres, but the remaining 600 acres were more profitable than the original 800 had ever been. More importantly, Jake had gained something much more valuable than land. He had a family. Alina was walking now, toddling around the ranch and following Jake everywhere he went. She had her mother's dark eyes and her father's stubborn determination. Jake couldn't imagine life without her constant chatter and endless curiosity. About everything from chickens to tractors, Maria had blossomed too. The scared pregnant woman Jake had found in the storm was gone, placed by a confident partner who knew as much about running the ranch as he did. She handled all the business calls now. Suppliers had learned not to try to cheat the sharp-eyed woman who asked tough questions and checked every invoice twice. One evening, as they sat on the front porch watching Alina play with a barn cat, Jake brought up something they'd been dancing around for months. Maria, he said, I've been thinking. About us, I mean? About making this official. Maria looked at him with a smile. Are you asking me to marry you, Jake Martinez? I guess I am, Jake said, suddenly nervous. I know it's not exactly romantic, sitting here covered in barn dust and smelling like cattle feed. But I love you, and I love Alina, and I want us to be a real family. We already are a real family, Maria said, reaching over to take his hand. But yes, I would like to marry you too. They had a small wedding in the front yard of the ranch 6 months later. Alina, now almost 2 years old, served as the flower girl and managed to trip over her own feet twice during the short ceremony. Jake's neighbors, who had once thought he was crazy for risking everything to help a stranger, came to celebrate with them. You know, Tom said to Jake during the reception, I owe you an apology. I thought you'd lost your mind when you mortgaged the ranch for her. But looking at you now, seeing how happy you are and how well the ranch is doing, I think maybe you're the smartest man in the county. Jake looked over at Maria, who was dancing with Alina while the little girl giggled and tried to spin in circles. 3 years ago, he'd been a lonely widower, just trying to keep his ranch afloat. Now he had a wife who was also his business partner, a daughter who brought joy to every day, a ranch that was more successful than it had ever been. The storm that brought Maria into his life had seemed like a disaster at the time. Jake had nearly lost everything trying to help her. But sometimes the biggest risks lead to the greatest rewards. 2 years later, they bought back the 200 acres Jake had been forced to sell, plus an additional 100 acres from a neighboring ranch. Alina had a baby brother named Diego, and Maria was pregnant with their 3rd child, standing in the same spot where he'd first found. Maria huddled under the oak tree during that terrible storm. Jake marveled at how much his life had changed. He'd risked his ranch to offer hope to a desperate woman, and in return she'd given him more hope than he'd ever dreamed possible. The oak tree still stood by the highway, offering shelter to anyone who needed it. But Jake's house was no longer a place where lost souls stopped temporarily before moving on. It was a home. It's filled with laughter and love and the sound of children playing. Sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as the greatest challenges. Jake had learned that lesson the hard way, but he wouldn't change a single moment of the journey that had brought his family together.